Welcome into the I-80 Boys preview and prediction video. Today we're talking about the Florida Gators. I'm going to start us off with the offense, and then I'll kick it over to Christian for the defense. Last year, Florida, kind of disappointing season, 5-7. They didn't make a bowl game. They were 3-5 in conference. Offensively, they averaged 28.4 points per game. That was 59th in the country. The big thing this year, and I know I get a lot of hate for apparently hating on the Gators, but Graham Mertz came in from Wisconsin last year, Christian. He actually played really well. He surprised me. He actually had a pretty efficient season. He led the SEC in completion percentage, which is pretty damn good. He was almost 73%. He had 20 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions, so he protected the ball. That was a lot better than what he did at Wisconsin. He turned the ball over a lot at Wisconsin. I watched a ton of him over there. But overall, he actually had a pretty good year. Now, he was throwing the ball a lot to Ricky Pearsall. We know he's in the NFL. I think he's on the 49ers right now. How do they fill that role? I'm not sure. I think it's Eugene Wilson will try to replace him. That's the guy that I looked up and found. A lot of people are pretty high on him. They like, the fans like to compare him. I can't believe I'm using this kid's name is Percy Harvin. A lot of people are making comparisons to him. If anybody remembers, Percy Harvin was an all-world athlete. Dude was a stud there at Florida. So they're going to need some people to step up there. Also, we talked about this in our Georgia video. They lost Trevor Etienne to Georgia. I think it's Montrell Johnson now will become probably the bell cow over there this year. They're going to have to run the ball better, man. Florida struggled last year. And that brings me to my next point. I thought the offensive line sucked last year for Florida. I said it week in and week out. Very inconsistent, which is surprising the way that Florida recruits anyway. But they're going to have to get a lot better up there. They allowed 22 more sacks last year than they did the year before. That's a lot. I think they were in the 40s last year. That's not going to get it done, especially you're going to have to try to keep Graham Mertz upright. So offensively, going to have to make some improvements, especially playing in the SEC. But, Christian, I'm going to kick it over to you for the defense and let me know, man.
Yeah, I mean, Florida finished last year ranked 69th in total defense, Chris. I mean, which isn't, I mean, it's not bad, when you consider the fact they had a first-year defensive coordinator in Austin Armstrong, right? To me, look, the Gators lost a couple of key contributors in their front seven from last year. So they're going to have to look for guys like Justice Boone and Tyreek Sapp, to take those next steps forward and get even better and kind of pace them, right? I think the linebackers are going to be led by Shamar James, and then South Carolina transfer Grayson Howard as well to kind of round out that front seven for them. The good news for Florida is they get back a good bit of their secondary from last year, right? Guys like Jordan Castell and Jason Marshall Jr., to kind of lead the defensive backs. I also look for Washington transfer safety Asa Turner, to help in the back end of things as well for them. Chris, look, here's the biggest thing. Their biggest issue last year was getting lost in coverage at times, and that needs to change this year, right? If your secondary struggles, the front seven has to be, really, really good, right? You have to be able to get a quarterback and affect his timing and kind of get in his head a little bit, right? The old Sam Darnold adage of seeing ghost has to apply. The thing that Florida, to me, that I look at going into this year is, losing those guys that they lost, right? Those transfers that are out of the, out of the program now. How bad does that affect them? You know what I mean? Because again, somebody what you're relying on is somebody to come out and have an uncharacteristically good year in the front seven in order to kind of generate that pressure to help with the back end of things. So, and again, I'll put it this way: like, I don't know if that got necessarily fixed in the off season. We watched the spring game, and it looked like they had major lapses in their coverage, at times. And, hey, that just can't happen. So it'll be interesting to see. With that being said, Chris, we'll get into the Gators record prediction here. And I'll start us off. I got Florida going 3-9, Chris. I know that's going to sting for some Florida fans out there, right? I know that's going to be like, what the hell is this guy talking about? And some of the losses and some of the wins I'm going to kind of talk about here might shock people. I think it's entirely possible. That Florida beats Miami week 1. Okay. I think Miami's got a lot of question marks, very similar to Florida. I think Mario Cristobal, very similar to Billy Napier, recruits really well. I think both of their biggest issues is, what can they do with that talent, right? Actually managing the talent and getting it to perform on field is such a key thing, for both these coaches and both these guys. So when you strip that out of the way, right, consider all things being even, I think the game being at the Swamp leans a little more for Florida in this particular game. Again, Cam Ward's coming over to Miami. It's going to be his first game, that he's going to play. So I think Florida can definitely beat Miami. Sanford's played them close before, but I don't think that's going to happen this go around. Then you go into the rest of the season here. So that I got them beating Sanford and Miami to start the year off. Then you got to play Texas A&M. Okay, Texas A&M going to bring a defense. Offensively, I don't know what we're going to see. A&M's kind of historically been, one of those teams that I think offensively kind of goes like on a roller coaster, where they play up and down, up and down. I think that they could come into this game and beat Florida. So I got A&M as a loss here. Mississippi State, even though it's at Mississippi State is going to be one of the worst teams in the SEC this year. Again, just from what I'm thinking and just looking at it, Florida should beat them, so I'm not going to say that. UCF. I got Florida losing to UCF, Chris. Their coach, who's a Gus Malzahn, I believe, at UCF. He don't play. I mean, he's built the legit program down there. He's got a top 50 recruiting class at UCF, right? One of the best at the, one of the best recruit. I was going to say at the group of 5 level, but he's not in the group of 5 anymore. They're in the Power 4 now because they're in the Big 12. So again, they don't have to travel super far to get to Gainesville. To me, like I said, I think UCF can beat Florida, even though it is, at the Swamp. Got to go on the road to play Tennessee. Come on now. I'll say this. Florida, I know, has, like you've always pointed out, Florida has kind of owned Tennessee in years past. Tennessee wants revenge for last year, right? The game's at Neyland. I think Rocky Dobb's going to be playing all night long. Kentucky's a pretty tough-nosed team. Kentucky dominated them last year, man. They ran the ball with Ray Davis all down their throat. And I think they got an upgrade at the quarterback position this year. I think defensively they're going to be better. Kentucky got an infusion of talent in the offseason. I'm going to still lean Kentucky and Mark Stoops. Georgia, come on now. We already know what that's going to be. You got to travel on the road at Texas. No, sir. LSU. No, I think LSU will travel well. Ole Miss, same thing. I think they're going to travel well and finish the year off at Florida State. I'm going to lean Florida State in that one as well. Chris, I'll throw it back over to you.
I got them doing one game better than what you said, man. I have them going 4-8. Now Vegas has them at 4.5 wins, so we're pretty close. We're actually under on that. So that's what the betting public thinks. Now, what that means is that's where people are, willing to put their money where their mouth is. Essentially, not too many people really high on Florida this year. Like you said, Miami. I like Miami, and I'm uber high on Miami this year. I think they're going to be a really good team. I can't believe I'm saying that. Usually I think Miami's usually going to be about average at 6-6. I do think Miami's going to be a really good team. So I have them dropping that game. You better win, the game against Sanford. Now, Florida, before I get into this A&M game, Christian, Florida seems to win a game with Billy Napier that they shouldn't every year. A couple years ago, that was Utah on the road, I believe it was. And I don't know, it wasn't on the road. It was at home. They beat Utah, a very good Utah team. And then last year they beat Tennessee. Man, Tennessee was rated pretty high. We remember that. We actually broadcasted that game. I think they beat A&M this year. That was one I had A&M dropping. Then you go on the road at Mississippi State. I think you beat them. I think they're going to probably be one of the worst teams in the SEC this year. I agree with you about the Central Florida thing. Florida happens to play like every Florida team this year, I swear. I think Central Florida is a better program right now than Florida is. And I think it's going to be proved on October 5th. Now you go on the road at Tennessee, and I feel like an idiot because I did this last year. I picked Tennessee. I'm picking Tennessee again, and I know Florida's owned them. I get that. But I'm leaning Tennessee. Now Kentucky's actually owned Florida the last few seasons, and you said it best, out-physicaled them. I think Ray Davis ran for 350 yards and still running against that Florida defense last year. But I have Florida beating Kentucky here. I do. So I kind of flip-flopped it. Then this next 5 games here is probably the hardest 5-game stretch in the country. I don't care who was playing these 5 games. I don't care if it's Oregon or Ohio State. It would be tough to come out of these things 5-0. I mean, Georgia, no way. At Texas, I don't think so. LSU, Ole Miss, no. And at Florida State to end the year, the fact that it's on the road, give me Florida State in that one. Overall, I have Florida, like I said, going 4-8. Now, Christian, I want to ask you a question here. And I want a legit answer from you. What's the floor? What's the ceiling for Florida this year in Billy Napier?
Because I think we touched on the floor,
Yeah.
So I think we touched 4 wins is kind of the floor. What's the ceiling? I would say for them. What's the ceiling? I mean, looking at this, like you said, Chris, I just went through and I counted it. They're going to play 8 potential top 25 teams, this year, right? Miami can be a top 25 team, I think, potentially. UCF, Tennessee, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State. I mean, you look through it, and it's 8 out of the 12 games that they're going to play are just packed with, and even more so, right? You can make the argument for A&M and maybe Kentucky in there as well. But I think the ceiling for Florida, honestly, like if everything goes right, they get off to a hot start. They start doing some things. They utilize the swamp, is maybe like 5-6 wins, somewhere in there. I mean, this is just a brutal schedule. There's a lot of question marks on the defensive side of the ball. You need that offense to be clicking every single game. You're going to have to win probably some shootouts, where it applies. So to me, that's the way I look at it, Chris. What are your thoughts?
I agree 100%. You said it best. This is probably the toughest schedule in the country. In order for them, I would say 6 wins, a bowl game, to keep Billy Napier's job, in my opinion, because they would have to even if they do lose a game against Miami to start the season, you better than rattle off Stanford, A&M, Mississippi State, beat Central Florida, and then try to come up with 2 more wins there, whether that's Kentucky, maybe somehow you beat LSU or Ole Miss, or maybe Florida State at the end of the year. But this is tough. I don't care who's playing this schedule. Like I said, let us know down in the comments what you think. But I think probably 6 wins, best case scenario for Florida this year.